In the Ottoman world, power could be dazzling, but the machinery that kept it in order was cold, efficient, and unforgiving. In the Ottoman world, justice was not just about courts and codes, it was about sending a message. Penalties were designed to correct the offender and to caution the crowd. They were part law, part theater, and always a reminder that the state's reach extended into every street, barracks, and border posts. For lesser crimes, the punishment might be to remove someone from power without ending their life, like blinding a traitor or a rebel. For greater crimes, the execution was swift and severe, like the execution of Sheikh Bedreddin in 1420, whose crime was to inspire a social and economic uprising. Some punishments were meant to inflict sharp pain that would enforce compliance, like falaka, or the number of strikes to the soles of the feet. This was a management tool as much as a punishment. Other punishments were deliberately public, like hangings, which took place in markets, gates, and parade grounds. Amputations were also a common punishment, usually for theft or violent disorder. And then there were the harsher measures, reserved for extraordinary times, for when the cost of defiance had to be made unmistakable. The message was simple: to deter, to correct, or to remove. When you think of the Ottoman Empire, you probably imagine a vast, sprawling bureaucracy. But what kind of punishments did they have for those who broke the law? The answer might surprise you. In the Ottoman Empire, execution was not just about punishment, it was about sending a message. It showed the decisiveness and order of the state, as well as the supremacy of the authority that wielded such power. One of the most well-documented cases was that of Sheikh Bedreddin in 1420. He was a respected jurist and mystic, who had gained followers from among the peasants and disillusioned citizens. His rebellion, seen as a threat to the stability of the state, was put down and he was executed in Ceres. The act was not portrayed as cruelty, but as balance restored. Defiance answered with law, rebellion countered with order. The Ottomans also used execution as a tool of war, a way to display their power to conquered peoples. After a battle, the defeated leader or captured opponents would be sentenced to death and the news sent back to the capital as proof of victory. This announcement had multiple purposes. It reassured the people that the empire was stable and strong, demonstrated the army's loyalty to the Sultan, and reminded rivals of the Sultan's reach. These acts were not only about ending resistance, they were about showing evidence of control. The Ottomans used hanging as a form of punishment, and it carried with it a kind of finality that other penalties did not. Unlike flogging or imprisonment, which could be hidden away, hanging was public. It happened at city gates, busy markets, or open squares where people gathered. It was meant to be seen. The condemned might be a murderer, a bandit, a deserter, or someone who had engaged in open revolt. In each case, the punishment was meant to send a message. By staging the act in front of communities, the empire was sending a clear signal that certain boundaries were absolute, and those consequences were not just severe, they were inescapable. The body, when suspended in public, could be seen from all angles. There was no hiding what had been done, and there was no forgetting it. For the Ottomans, this was the point. Hanging was not just a punishment, it was a lesson for everyone. Among the most severe punishments in the Ottoman system were those reserved for extraordinary moments. Think of times of political intrigue, rebellion, or crises that threatened the empire's stability. These measures were rare, but their very rarity gave them enormous weight. They were designed not for everyday discipline, but for moments when rulers needed to demonstrate that no challenge to authority would be tolerated. One such punishment was castration. Imagine a world where having children was more than a personal matter. It was a social, political, and religious duty. For men in Ottoman society, it wasn't just about fathering heirs. It was about creating a lineage, upholding their family's honor, and securing their place in the next generation. So when someone like Sultan Ahmed III had a son who was deemed unsuitable, not quite up to the mark, what was done was seen as nothing short of an unforgivable crime. Castration was more than a physical punishment. It was a removal from the future. It erased not only their ability to have children, but also their very identity within their society. A man without sons was a man without a legacy. He was disconnected from his past and his future, a notion that resonates even today. But even this, as horrible as it was not the worst that could happen. In the annals of the Ottomans, there's a punishment that looms larger than life, and that was the punishment of impalement, which is also called the death penalty. Now, this wasn't something that happened every day. It was used sparingly, mostly on the empire's frontiers or during moments of rebellion. The Ottomans, like many others, associated certain punishments with certain situations, and this was the ultimate show of force. When the Ottomans used it, they didn't just break a body, they broke the spirit of disobedience. It was a spectacle meant to send a message that echoed far beyond the pain and suffering of the moment. People knew that the Sultan had such a tool at his disposal, and that knowledge alone was often enough to keep them in line. Now, interestingly, the Ottomans weren't the only ones who used impalement, their neighbors did too. And some stories got so big that they became part of the popular imagination. For instance, there's a story about Vlad the Impaler, also known as Dracula. He dipped his bread in blood, they say, and he dipped his bread in blood because he was executed in a particularly gruesome manner. Now, whether or not Vlad the Impaler dipped his bread in blood isn't really important. What is important is that people believed he did. And this belief, this little story served as a reminder for the Ottomans and their neighbors about the fate that awaited those who dared to defy authority. So while we might look back and judge these practices as barbaric or horrible or inhumane, it's essential to remember the context in which they existed. These weren't just acts of violence, they were attempts, however misguided, to maintain order, to establish authority, and to create a lasting impact. And in a world without easy answers, where each situation is a complex web of actions and reactions, it makes us wonder, how far would you go to maintain order? How much is enough when it comes to punishment, and what's the fine line between justice and revenge? When we think of punishments throughout history, images of dark and dank dungeons, shackles and manacles might spring to mind, but in the vast and varied realm of the Ottoman Empire, justice was meted out in a manner both brutal and bold, often in the heart of public squares and bustling marketplaces. Forget the discreet confines of a courtroom. In Ottoman lands, justice was a spectacle. From the 13th to the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was a sprawling mix of cultures and convictions. Rulers across its various states employed a range of tactics to keep the peace, from swift executions to more corrective measures. Now, these weren't everyday occurrences, but when they did happen, they weren't kept under wraps. The Ottomans believed in making an example of those who broke the law, literally. Thieves, rebels, or those who dared defy the Sultan's authority would meet their end in a manner designed to send chills down the spines of the audience. The marketplaces, city gates, and military camps were the stages for these public spectacles. Crowds would gather not just out of morbid curiosity, but to absorb a lesson. The condemned person's fate would become a story, a warning that would travel far and wide, carried by word of mouth and embedded in local law. But let's not picture these punishments as solely barbaric. Some, like falaka, which involved a severe beating, were meant to be corrective, a painful but necessary discipline. Others, like execution or amputation, were reserved for more serious offenses, those that threatened the very fabric of the empire's social order. And at the extreme edge, punishments like the death penalty or banishment were employed sparingly. Their very rarity is what made them so potent, striking fear into the hearts of those who heard or witnessed these tales. What we have here then is a system that combined practicality with theatrics, always mindful that the purpose of law was not just about delivering justice, but cultivating obedience across a vast and diverse population. The Ottoman Empire understood that to maintain order, you had to make an example of those who broke it, turning each punishment into a spectacle that served as a constant reminder of the consequences of disobedience. And while these punishments might seem extreme by today's standards, they were a product of their time, a reflection of a society grappling with issues of security, social order, and control in ways that we can understand but perhaps can't condone. Nevertheless, they offer us a unique lens through which to view the past, reminding us that history is not just about power struggles and political machinations, but also about the everyday realities of life under one of the most influential empires of the medieval and early modern world.